Hello, I'm Miss Laura with the Wichita Falls Arts Council, and today we're going to learn how to use graph paper to draw a maze. We're going to start off with little practice mazes, and using what we learn, it's all the same steps to make any of these mazes. You can scale it up, create a maze in a fun shape, use the entire paper to make a giant maze. You can make a maze with some decoration. We have this maze kind of in the shape of a park and a bird's eye view. We have trees along the border. It has a start, a finish, and some bodies of water, and the maze sort of takes place around all of these elements. This is another maze with two worms creating our border. We have a start and an end. And there's one solution to get through here that sort of works around this little donut center and eventually ends up at the end. So we're going to start with our first practice maze. I'm using a pencil today. I have one sheet of graph paper, and I'm also using a thin marker or pen. I'm using the pencil for lines that I'm going to erase later and the pen for my permanent lines. So whatever drawing utensils you decide to use, you need one that erases and one that does not erase. So starting with the pencil, I'm going to zoom in to the top left corner of my paper where I'll start. And I'm starting in the top left corner so that I have plenty of room to draw other mazes on this graph paper sheet. Scale that there. Okay. So using my pencil, I'm going to create a border around a 4x4 square, meaning the square will be 4 little squares wide by 4 little squares tall. And I'm using my pencil to lightly draw walls around this 4x4 space. These are the borders of, or this is the border of my first maze. All of the maze will happen within this 4x4 square. I need to now create openings for my maze to start and another opening for it to end. So I'm going to erase a little opening somewhere on my border. Typically, we start in the top left corner, and then we'll exit the maze down at the bottom right. These openings or these starts and ends can be anywhere along the border, but typically we see them here and here. I'm going to take my pen or thin marker and trace along the pencil border, making sure not to draw over the openings that I've just erased. I want to keep those open. I'm now going to write some instructions for the maze user. And that'll be start at the entrance of my maze and then end at the exit. You could use different words or symbols to sort of denote the start and the end of your maze. You can do an S and an E or an F for finish. It doesn't matter as long as we know where we're starting and where we're ending. You can choose the labels that you want. There could be a cupcake at the end instead of the word end. Okay, now that we've labeled the start and the finish, we have the walls of our maze. We need to draw the inside or the guts of the maze. And we're going to do that by switching back to our pencil. And I'm going to draw my first line. I'm going to zoom in. So starting at the start, I'm going to draw a line that goes from the start all the way to the end. As you can see, I'm traveling in between the boxes. And I'm going to try to take an interesting path I'm not tracing the blue lines. I'm traveling in between the boxes. I'm not traveling at a diagonal. I'm either making an up and down, or I'm either traveling up and down or from right to left. I'm not going at a diagonal at any point. And my line needs to start at the start and then continue all the way until the end. This is our solution line, or the line that tells us how to solve the maze. So in designing a maze, it's kind of like we're working backwards. We're solving it first and then creating all of the dead ends and traps after. Okay, once we have our solution line, we need to create some dead ends or traps. And we do that by looking at all of these empty squares. We need to fill them with different paths that we can take that don't end up going anywhere. So I'm going to look at these three on the right here. Depending on the type of solution line you drew and the path it took, your empty boxes may be in different places, but the principle is still the same. We're going to start by branching off of an existing line. So right now, all we have is our solution line. So we're going to start by branching off of this line. And I can branch off from here, 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 here. It doesn't matter where I branch off from, as long as I'm branching off somewhere from my solution line and I'm traveling into the empty boxes. And because this is not a solution line, I've already drawn that, this one's going to end in a dead end in the middle of a square. So it's important that after you draw your solution line, you're only drawing dead end lines. And there are two traits that every dead end line has in order to work. It ends in the middle of a square at one end, and it's connected to some other line at the other end. So it's connected on one end, and it ends in the middle of a square at the other. And that's what makes it a dead end. I have these 4 remaining squares now, which I also need to put dead ends into. I can do one continuous line that ends in a dead end. I can maybe make 2 dead ends. I can fill in starting at the solution line here. I'm branching off. And I'm traveling into some of these empty boxes. I'll just have this one end in a dead end. Still have 2 empty squares. I can also branch off from a dead end line. It doesn't matter where I'm branching off from or what kind of line I'm branching off from, as long as it's connected to a line on one end and it ends in an empty square at the end. So dead end on this side, connected on the other side. Take a moment to look at your 4x4 grid. If all of these boxes are filled with either a dead end or a line passing through, then you are finished drawing guidelines. You don't want to leave any empty boxes or else you're wasting space on your maze. I'm going to take my pen or thin marker and start drawing the walls of my maze using the help of my guidelines. And I'm going to do that by treating each of these little line segments, like from here to here, or from here to here, or from here to here. All of these little line segments made up of the blue grid lines, I'm treating as little individual lines. So I'm going to look at them one by one. I'm going to start with this one right here. It goes from the top, it goes down. And because there's no pencil going through it, I'm going to trace it. If I look at the line right underneath it, going from here to here, there is a pencil line running right through it. So I'm going to leave that one alone. I don't trace it. I don't do anything with it. This line right here, all clear. No pencil line going through it. I'm going to trace it. This line right here, no pencil line, trace it. This line right here, pencil line going right through, leave it alone. Line next to it, I can trace because there's no pencil line going through it. And I'm just going to go throughout this entire maze and trace every blue line section that doesn't have a pencil line going through it. Once I feel like I'm done, I'm going to scan my maze, make sure I didn't miss any of those uninterrupted blue lines. And once I'm sure that I haven't, I'm going to grab my pencil with its eraser and erase the guidelines in order to create a finished maze. Okay, next we're going to do a 6x6. So slightly larger, all of the same rolls. I'm going to take my pencil, always starting with the pencil, and drawing a border around a square that is 6 little squares wide and 6 little squares tall. Once I have my border drawn in pencil, I'm going to erase a start and an end. This time I might start up here. Doesn't matter where your entrance and your exit to your maze are. And I'll exit here. As long as there's one entrance and one exit. Once you've erased your entrance and your exit, you're going to trace over the border of your maze, making sure not to trace over the entrance and the exit. We're tracing with that thin marker or pen. And add some little walls for the start and the finish. Okay, so we're doing start. We're labeling the start of our maze, and then we're going to label the end. I mean, E for end. Or an F. Once we have our entrance and our exit labeled, we're going to always start by drawing our solution line. So we're going to use a pencil for this because all of our guidelines will be erased, so we need to use pencil. And we're going to draw one continuous line traveling from the start all the way to the finish, making sure not to trace the blue lines with pencil. We're going in between the blue lines. Once we have our solution line established, it goes all the way from the start to the end, traveling in between the squares and not on the blue lines. And then we need to fill in all of these empty squares with either a dead end line, well, I guess just dead end lines. We've already drawn our solution line. So I'm going to start by looking at any of the empty squares and finding a line that's close to them so I can branch off and then create a dead end. After we're done with our solution line, which is the first line we draw, we're no longer connecting a line from end to end. So at no point am I going to start a dead end line and then reconnect back to the path, because then that's no longer a dead end and it's just another solution and it makes a boring maze. So we want to make sure our dead ends are actual dead ends and they end in the middle of squares. I have some empty squares here. Looks like I'm going to maybe start from here. And I'm traveling into all of these empty squares and end in a dead end. I have one little tiny square right here that's all alone. And I need to do something with it. I can just go from my solution line or dead end line, draw into the square with the shortest path ever, and end in a dead end. Once all of your squares are occupied, you're going to grab your marker or thin marker or pen and trace over all of the blue grid lines that don't have a pencil going through them. Before you do this, you do want to make sure that you don't have any empty squares, because if you do, you end up creating little boxes, and I'll show you what that looks like. And by creating those boxes, you're wasting maze space. Okay, and oh, missed one. Okay, sometimes someone might leave an empty square in their maze. Turn this into a dead end. And they end up creating a little box like this. We do not want this. It is wasting our space. We want to make sure that every little box or every square has a path going into it, even if it's a really tiny path like this one. You could just come from one square over and then end in a dead end. That way we're using our space well. We don't want a box. Okay, now we're gonna do an irregular maze, or a maze with an irregular border. And I'm gonna do that by just drawing a blob. So I'm using my pencil just like I would if I were drawing a square maze or creating the borders of a square maze. I'm just going to make a sort of like a blob shape. It's a little bit bigger than my 6x6 maze. Once I have my shape established, I need to, just like the other mazes, open up an entrance and an exit. So I'm going to start here. And I'm going to exit here. I'm going to use my pen or marker to trace the blob's border, making sure not to trace over the entrance or the exit. Maybe I'll have it come out a little bit. It looks like a stomach. Write the word start, and we'll do F for finish this time. And even though our border is irregular and blobby, we're still going to use the grid. So I'm going to start by creating my solution line, the line that goes all the way from the start to the finish. But some of these squares aren't complete because our border sort of cuts into them. And that's okay. There's still usable space. We can still travel a little bit into it. If it's a really tiny space like this, you could just ignore them. Once you have your solution line, you can now examine and find all of those empty boxes that we need to fill with dead ends. You can create an extra long dead end line, always branching off from another line. Every dead end line ends in the middle of a square on one end and is connected to another line on the other. Some empty squares here. Once you're sure that you don't have any empty squares, you're just going to comb through and look and make sure none of these squares are empty. And then you can start drawing the walls of your maze by tracing all of the blue line sections that don't have pencil interrupting them or going through them. Uh-oh. Once you're done tracing all of your blue lines that are uninterrupted by pencil, I don't like these ones here, you can erase your guidelines and you'll have a finished maze. You have the rest of your paper, even the back side, to create a larger maze or continue to make small mazes. I'm going to make a little donut maze. You can choose to make any shape you want. All of the rules are the same. Draw a border around your maze. Erase an entrance and an exit. Trace over your border. Draw your solution line, and then fill the rest of the empty boxes with dead end lines. And then trace over all of the blue lines that don't have pencil interrupting them. Actually, I think I'm going to put my start in the middle here. Okay, so look like a little ant that's trying to escape. Starting by drawing my solution line. traveling in between the boxes. Goes all the way from the start to the end. Now I'm going to draw some dead end lines. And all of these empty boxes.